This is me, I'm so royal, and you all wanna be round. Yeah, you all wanna be round. Round a champion, a champion. This is me, I'm still on it, 'cause you all wanna be loved. Yeah, you all wanna be loved by a champion, a champion.
Hey everyone, just want to do a quick intro. This is the bike build series. Now, I started building it and filming it, and the first recordings didn't turn out. I had all the wrong settings. It was completely blurry. So by the time I got into it, the forks and everything were on it. Now, I take this bike apart and put it back together a couple times, and the audio is going to sound kind of off. I'm still learning about the audio and adjusting that. Any suggestions, comments to help me with this video to make it better, let me know. But I'm going to start posting these videos because I've got quite a few and I just want to get them out there on YouTube so you guys can check out the bike and see the build all the way to completion. So be patient with the videos. Understand that there was probably a fan running. It was hot, middle of the summer, so there might be a little background noise, and I apologize for that too. Have any questions, feel free to post comments below. Thumbs up if you like what you see. Like I said, let me know, post comments, help me to make these videos better for you guys. Until then, check it out. All right everybody, so we're gonna take a look at what I've done so far. You can see the forks are mounted with the RockShox suspension. The rear suspension is mounted to the rear swing arm, and the seat post bracket is mounted there. And as you can see, the handlebars have also been installed. So I'm going to go over a little bit how this was all done, so then we can start actually working on the bike and filming video for that. I want to take note of something here, that when you get one of these bikes from Lely, the races are already going to be pressed into the frame. I don't know if you've seen some of the other assembly videos. They actually press the frames in the factory. They press the races into the frame and then set the bearing in there. Now the bearing will come in and out. It just sets in place there. Now if the bottom bearing does come out, when you set it in, make sure that there's an inside taper to the bearing on one side. Make sure that is facing out away from the frame, because this fork has a small ring pressed on it that will ride in that taper. If you don't have it that way, if you have it reversed, this thing will flop around. It won't set properly. Learn from my mistake. I didn't realize that in the beginning, and after taking it out a couple times and looking at it, I figured out what was happening. Before you assemble any of these moving parts here, and here, put some grease around the bearing. It is lubricated, but put some grease around the outsides of the bearing and put it in place. And then on the base here, the ring here, and then up inside here, if you can see, there's this tapered ring here. This rests on a little sleeve that goes inside the bearing and then goes inside the bottom of this, and that's what holds this rigid here. So make sure that you put some grease around all of this. Anywhere you have a moving part, you definitely want to have grease there. Another tip here for these is, you can see there are set screws here that clamp the lower triple tree to the forks. You may want to loosen these up, but before you do, make sure you get all of this in place, and just get this. There's a cap here, and I can flip this over and show you, but I'll do it at another time. There is a cap right here at the end. Put this in just slightly snug, not really tight, just enough to get all these rings in place and everything holding in place here. And you don't have to tighten this screw yet. Just get the triple tree over the end of the forks. Mine came and the fork was sitting up here about mid-ring of the triple tree. So what I did was is loosen these screws up here once I had it together, and then slid the forks down a little bit, so I had just about 1/8 of an inch there reveal. And that way I ensure that the triple tree, the top part, was clamping on to the tube completely. And if you need to, you'll have some room here that you may be able to make an adjustment should this be a little too high for your ride. Just know that you can loosen the screws here, they clamp the triple tree here and here, and adjust these forks slightly, but you won't have a whole lot of room to do all that. And then don't remove these. These are rubber bumps, so when you turn, it hits the frame. It doesn't hit metal to metal or metal to the plastic cover and damage. It just bumps it on this rubber bump here. Also, if you crash, a violent strike could cause more damage than you want it to. So the rubbers are going to be great for that. So then once you've got all this set in place and you tighten these screws here and these here and this one here, you're going to line this slot right here with, there's a slot here. I'm going to turn the handlebars just a little bit so you can see better. So this slot here and this slot here need to be lined up so that your handlebars are straight with the forks. And I just use a ruler to see that this line was straight with it, and then made sure that it fell in the center of this line. You can use a straight edge, you can use a laser line if you've got it. Some of us don't have all that nice fancy equipment, so simple ruler worked just fine. And then I tightened it up. And then the handlebars are also pretty easy to put in. You can see there's just 4 screws here for the front. And I'm going to take this and flip it on its side so I can show you. There's indicators here. So I'm going to turn it on its side here. Alright. So as you can see on the handlebars, there are indicators here, and there are dash marks on this as well, right here and here. So, and on the other side as well. That's to help you center the handlebars, because you're not going to be able to see the center line that runs through the center of these handlebars. So you use these lines and make sure that you have the same amount of lines exposed and the same distance apart. That will center your handlebars. Okay? So I'm going to set this bike back up so you can see the rear suspension. Okay, the rear suspension here, just a single monoshock. It mounts here to this bracket, which you'll have to install first. My suggestion is there are 4 holes here, so you have basically 3 adjustments, and you want to use the topmost adjustment unless you're really tall. This bike is going to sit high, and it's best to set it there first. And once you've got a roller assembly, which is I'll have the wheels on, you can then sit on it and see how it fits for you, how it's going to ride as far as the height, and then adjust there. And also remember that if the ride you want a little smoother or more rigid, you've got adjustments on the shocks here and over there. Here is where the mount is for the rear fork, because this will come 2 separate pieces. There's a bolt here, and there are pressed bearings in the frame in here. And I'm going to give you an upper view of it so you can see that there is a pivot point here that's welded into the frame. Actually, I can probably film it from inside too, as you can see. You want to make sure you put grease between these 2 parts, on the front of this part here, and then on the shaft of this bolt. You don't have to use any Loctite because it does have a nylon lock ring, so I don't recommend using thread locker with the bolt. You know, once it has one of those nylon rings, that's really going to hold it in place good. So this is a 13 millimeter, and this side is a 12 millimeter wrench. And then once you've got this plate here mounted, as you see, like I said, I've mounted it to the high position here. Then you can put the shock in. This is a sleeve bolt. I'll pull this out and show you. You can see it's just a sleeve, and that will go in here, through here, and then the other one goes up in this hole. Now this hole here in the rear swing arm here, this hole is very tight tolerance, and with the paint it actually wasn't big enough to put the sleeve through. So you can use either a file, or you can just use a flathead screwdriver, sticking in the hole slowly and just working your way, turning it back and forth, working your way in a little bit and then out, and then from the other side, just rotating around, getting the paint out but not gouging the metal or removing too much. You don't want this to be sloppy in there, but you do want to be able to fit it in. So file it out, or use one of the screwdriver, something to scrape out that paint a little bit. Keep test fitting this until it fits through, but doesn't, make sure it's firm, or it's, a little tight but not too tight. Okay, and then once you've got that in place, take them out and use a little grease. Also use grease on the inside of this, between the mount bracket and the shock on both ends, and put a little grease in these holes once you've worked them out. Once you've taken the paint off, you've exposed the metal, and grease will help repel water and contaminants. Now you can use any kind of grease you want. I recommend using a marine grade grease like this. It's just a simple marine grease. It's not very expensive. You can pick it up at any auto parts place. You can use red moly or lithium grease if you like, but I prefer that. It's good for high temps, and it's also water resistant. And the other thing you'll need to get is some thread locker. Now all the bolts, and I'll show you, that come with the bike already have a little thread locker put on all of them. So you can see right there, except for the bolts in this wheel. And the reason that is that there is a plastic ring bolted to the wheel that's behind this brake now, and these screws are holding it in place. You have to remove those screws to take and put this disc brake on top of it. Okay, but make sure you keep the plastic ring in place, and then put this on, put a little thread locker, just a drop, it doesn't take a whole lot, and then snug these down good and tight. There are 6 bolts, so make sure you do 2 at a time, rotate and then rotate. It's simple, just like if you were doing lug nuts on a car. You don't want to over tighten 2 and then work the others, because you can work this wheel. You can see it's not super thick. This is a really heavy piece. So when you go to install this, unless you have help, the best thing to do is to get yourself a nice rigid work table. Mine, as you can see, is pretty thick wood, and then I just put a couple table legs that fold in from an office table. So now I've got a nice sturdy table, and what you want to do is, as you can see, I got blankets down. These are moving blankets that you can pick up at a discount hardware store for probably about $3-4 a piece. Really cheap and really nice, because they're also padded, so they'll take some shock and everything. So you want to make sure that you cover the handlebars so that they don't get damaged. And then I use a good rigid metal clamp here. So this is going to go over the handlebar and then under the table. So this clamping it down to the table. What that will do is it will hold the front in place, so that way as you're putting weight on the back, especially with that wheel, it'll hold it in place, and you won't have this thing falling over and crashing onto your floor. So we're going to put the wheels on the bike now. We're going to mount the rear wheel. So we're going to grab the rear wheel here. You can see we've already got the brake on it. I showed you earlier. So there is the big cable on this side where the disc is. And you want to make sure you hold that close to the brake, because there isn't a whole lot of clearance right here on the wheel on this side here. And I'm going to bring this up closer where you can see it. Now I've got the multi-speed sprocket. You can see there is a small ring that's slotted that goes over top of the shaft, and that will fit just about flush with this sprocket. So make sure that is in there. And then there is this spacer ring here that has to go on here as well. Okay, that is going to keep this from being right up against the frame. On the other side, it's perfectly enough space right here. We're actually not going to have any more space in the frame. Once you put this in place, it'll actually be very tight. You want to make sure that that ring is close to the wheel and that this wire is tucked in here. And you'll see, I'll take the camera back off and show you how tight it is once I've got it in place. So, okay, so we're going to put this on cable facing forward because we don't want the cable looping around and bending around. It's basically set for one length, and that is to go straight forward. Bring this cable in. You see the wheel is, rear arm is flexing, but the bike is not shifting. All right. Okay, so now we have the front wheel, and if you can tell, these two forks are different. This one here has the mounts for the brake, so that is where the brake is going to, that's where this side is going to go. So we're going to turn this out so it is loose. Take the grease here, and we're going to grease inside the wheel, and we're going to grease the shaft here. Again, this is even though the wheel has bearings, this has potential for spinning, and anytime it can spin, metal against metal is never a good thing. You always want to make sure that there is some kind of coating, lubrication, something to fill between the two pieces so that you don't have that coarse rubbing and premature failure of any of your parts. So right now I'm just greasing the inside of the axle there, and we're going to grease here, and we're going to grease it on the other side as well, just where the wheel is going to ride on it. It doesn't have to be a giant globbing thick ball of grease, just a very thin coat. You can see I'm just wiping it around with my finger. We don't want to grease in here. We don't need to grease in here. This is aluminum. So, but there is a little bit of a milled part here, so I'm just going to wipe the rest of the grease off my fingers on there. It's nothing really significant. So the wheel goes in here, and then the shaft, once you've got the wheel lined up, there we go. Axle's going to go right in. Make sure it's lined up the rest of the way. Tighten it up. Make sure it is snug, but not. Get on the other side here so I can see it. Want it snug, but not too tight. Spin it so that the clamp lines up with the forks. And actually just put it right here. Okay, so now you have the wheel on this side and the wheel on the back. I'm going to stop it at here, and the next video is going to be putting the seat on and setting on the bike, seeing how the ride height is.